Hello, my name is Mark Bishop. I'm a language arts teacher, and today I will be going over a brief lesson which will highlight some of the key California language arts standards for the 7th grade. The first part of this lesson will have to do with looking at a visual image. The visual image I will show you is something I would put on the smartboard if I were in the classroom. As it is, we've got a piece of paper. And here's the image. I hope you can see it okay, but it is, I forget the artist's name, but it is a picture called Insanity, which of course will work very well with Edgar Allan Poe and the Telltale Heart. Same kind of thematic ideas there. So what I'd ask the students to do is to look at this for a while. And what they would do is they'd have a graphic organizer. And they would organize that graphic organizer in 3 columns. The first one would be, what do we see? The second column is, what do we know? And the third is, why does it matter? So we're going from the literal, and then we're moving towards more and more interpretive and figurative kind of meaning behind things. So, when I start off literal, let's just look at this picture. Well, what do we see in this picture? Well, the most obvious thing that we see is we see a face. There's a face in this picture that appears to be screaming. You can almost hear it. Okay, so that's what we see. We also might notice that it has black eyes. Okay, so we notice there's no expression there, just black eyes. What do we know? Okay, well, if we've got an angry, screaming face, we can see that there's emotional turmoil. That's what we know. We also know something about eyes, okay? What do we see in the eyes? We see expression, we see personality, we see everything that makes up a person really is there in the eyes. But if there's no eyes, we don't get that expression, do we? Might have the expression of the mouth, but not in the eyes. Why does it matter? Well, it matters because if you don't have an expression in your eyes, you might have a void of personality. There might not be a lot going on there in a human sense. What else do we see? Well, we might comment on the blackness, the rusty clouds, all of this kinds of things, which we know also reflect sort of the unpleasantries of life. Why does it matter? Well, it reflects the pain again, okay? One thing that's subtle in this picture, if you can see it, is there are other faces in that picture. Well, what do we know? Well, we know that for every face you have an identity, right? So we might have many identities here. We might have fragmented identity. Why does that matter? Well, maybe because even when alone, the insane could be tormented by hidden identities bubbling up. Okay? So all this stuff is just an example. The students could write whatever they saw as valid. What they have to say on a deeper level also valid. So that would be step 1 in step 2 of the process of this lesson is we will return to the text of The Telltale Heart by Edgar Allan Poe. The students will have read the text prior to this particular lesson, so we don't need to go into the story. They already know it. What we're going to look at instead is how the theme is important. And we're going to look at a key word throughout this story. And that key word is going to be guilt. Because our narrator has a great deal of guilt, and it really determines everything that this story ends up becoming about. And what the students are going to do is that as they read through this story again, they're going to be looking for anything in the story that reveals that character's growing guilt. And they'll do this mainly through looking at 3 things: setting, figurative language, and imagery. And what they're going to be doing is creating a dialectical journal. And what the dialectical journal will do is they must give a reference to the text. We're going to be very specific on sticking to the text. And over here in the second column, you will have response to the text. And again, these are just examples. Students could say many, many different things. I'm briefly going to give some examples of some things we might discuss in class. Or the students might discuss one-on-one with each other or in small groups. So if we're going to stick with the setting here, we notice throughout the setting of this story, we have many references to midnight, to blackness, to darkness. Why? Why nighttime, a student might ask? Does the darkness hide guilt? Maybe. Maybe guilty feelings are hidden better in the darkness. Repetition of this dark setting reflects the darkness of this narrator's mind. A mind that is plagued with paranoia and guilt. So that might just be a couple of things they might say about the setting. We could move on then to figurative language. and how that might reflect guilt as well. There are many things students could say. These are just some examples. Perhaps a student might notice the dim ray of the narrator's lantern is like the thread of a spider. And the student might notice, I've got a simile there. They might want to point that out. They might also know a little bit from science class that spiders are predators. Does the narrator see himself as a predator? How does he feel about this? Is he guilty about it? Perhaps. There's also two separate comparisons of the beating of the old man's heart, and the narrator will compare it to twice the sound such as a watch makes when it is enveloped in cotton. Now, why would the narrator repeat this, the student might ask? Maybe it shows that the narrator's mind goes in obsessive circles, and indeed it does. We might see this paranoia leading to guilt, leading to paranoia, leading to guilt, leading to paranoia, leading to guilt, and going in those obsessive circles. Now, what if the student wants to now move on to imagery? There's a great deal of imagery all the way through the story. Again, imagery can be anything appealing to any of the five senses. So a student might notice that as the narrator is feeling greater and greater guilt, that he feels himself getting pale. His head aches. Maybe a student would say, I'm going to tie this into my own personal experience. I felt those same sensations when I've been guilty of something. I felt cold, I felt pale, headachy, clammy, all that kind of stuff. So they might make a personal tie in there as well. We might touch on to the point, getting with hearing, the sense of hearing here in imagery. I heard all things in heaven and earth. I heard many things in hell. Well, if you're hearing those kinds of things, this could be reflective of severe paranoia, guilt, very delusional, but very aware as well. Sometimes they say the highest state of awareness is paranoia. All right, sticking with the sound. Narrator hears a ringing in his ears, but I found the noise was not in my ears. Okay, so this shows a confusion, a disorientation brought on about by the guilt the student might observe. Just a couple other things. There's so many things in the realm of imagery we can say, and I'll try to wrap this up quickly, but towards the end of the story, the police come. The narrator talks more fluently with a heightened voice. He gasped for breath. I foamed, I raved, I swore. I grated the chair upon the floorboards. Okay, so as the narrator's guilt grows, he becomes more and more excited. And we can hear it in his voice, that guilt and that excitement and that emotional overload. We can hear it. We can also, towards the end of the story, we get the famous last lines. Hark! Louder! 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 The beating of his hideous heart! Well, a student might notice that this could not be the old man's heart, because the old man's dead. He's been chopped up. So the student might infer that it's got to be the narrator's heart. It must be that narrator's body's reaction to extreme guilt. Okay, so that would wrap up the dialectical journal, except for the very last part, where the student has to take all of those notes that he or she has made and provide some sort of a summary of what they've learned. And of course, we're talking about theme here. So, this is an example. Student could say many other different things. Edgar Allan Poe uses setting, figurative language, and imagery to reveal a character coming apart with guilt, a guilt that is so powerful that it leads to his confession. Okay, so what we've done is we've had an image that we had, and we pulled a thematic meaning from that. Then we went back to the text, and we pulled everything we could out of the words of that text to concentrate on the theme, which has to do with guilt. Last step of this process is that we're going to now create an image based upon the theme of the story, The Telltale Heart. And we call these one-pagers, and typically it's just going to be something just like a notebook piece of paper, like a computer paper, 8 by 11 inches. So, but I've created a larger one here just as an example of what a student might do. And in a one-pager, the student would be required, of course, to tell what the story is, the name of the author, and bring in some central images that sum up the theme for them, and also some quotes from the story as well. One or two or three, whatever that might have spoken to that student the best. So here's my example. I did mine of The Telltale Heart. by Edgar Allan Poe. And if you see here, I've got the image of the watch. Sound such as a watch makes when enveloped in cotton. I have an ear. The disease had sharpened my senses. And the hellish tattoo of the heart grew louder, louder. We've got the heart. The silence of the old house in the dead hour of night. The old man's a vulture eye. I heard many things in hell. So I get all these different images that we have up here. But most important is that the student puts some sort of a statement of theme there at the bottom of this. And theme can be a very hard thing for middle schoolers to understand. But this forces them to try to get at it. And the theme I wrote here, and it could be something a little different. This is just an example. The power of guilt will destroy the guilty. And that is my example. So that wraps up the lesson for what they would do with this particular activity. And as an extension of this, you might say, go home tonight and give me a good, solid paragraph response. Tell me how it's different or the same to take an image and get meaning from it, thematic meaning from it. How is that different or the same as getting the meaning or thematic meaning of a story and then creating a visual representation of that theme? But I mean, this could lead to many other things as well, all kinds of different essay assignments and that kind of thing. But that is the lesson in a nutshell. Thank you.